Kia ora koutou. Hopefully we are live on Facebook, and it is my absolutely thrilled pleasure to welcome Michael Bennett to Wardini Books Facebook page this afternoon. Tēnā koe, Michael. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Kia ora. It's so lovely to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. How's the weather in Tamaki Makaurau today?
It's kind of been crap for quite a while. It's
Oh.
less crap today. It's not actually raining, but yeah.
On a scale of 0 to crap, it's been quite crap.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
you know, and we always complain that I know the rest of the country's been so much colder than we have. So yeah, I won't be moaning in Auckland.
It's all relative, isn't it? So director, screenwriter, and author. So tell us, who is Michael Bennett?
A boyfriend and a dad, and I love my dog, and I do other stuff.
Oh, great. I've just written dog down because generally every person that I interview has a dog. So there's always a dog story involved. That's always good. So we're going to talk today about Better the Blood, which we're big fans of at Wardini Books. So thank you for the gift of this book. A
Awesome.
damn fine New Zealand thriller, serial killer book.
Oh, thank you.
And in Better the Blood, we have a new kind of hero, I feel, in Hannah Westerman. So she's Detective Senior Sergeant Hannah Westerman. And she is faced with family issues in this book. She is faced with a serial killer on the loose in Auckland. And I thought, I've just bookmarked a page because if we talk about Hannah's character, her daughter Addison gets into quite some trouble early on in the book. And Hannah's a police officer, and Jay, Addison's father, is a police officer. And Addison is just going off at them about injustice and the things that have happened to her as a young Māori woman on the town. And she's going off. They even made your mum's boss, but Mum, Jesus, a brown woman. How do you look in the fucking mirror? And Hannah just goes, okay. And they all sit down. They all just calm down. How did you create this amazing character?
You know, authors would like the world to believe that they create things out of nothingness, and not. We're the biggest. We're vampires. We steal the blood from all of those around us. And Hannah, if you know an author, I mean, I've always thought I should get cards printed saying, if you're going to talk to me, turn up in one of my books. Hannah is a montage, an amalgam of so many strong women in my world. She's an amalgam of my aunties, my sisters, my incredible daughters, of my mum. So my mum's maiden name was Westerman. So she's kind of, she's, I guess, or my partner Jane. She's little bits out of all of these incredible women who've been such an important part of my life, but also I guess showed me kind of like how to move through the world with pride and strength and tenacity, and you know, like there's a million ways that the character could have taken shape in different forms, but you know, this is a thriller book, and so the central character is a detective, and I think in my head it's always like, I'm not creating from nothingness, I'm creating from what would my mum or my girlfriend or my daughters do in this situation if they were a cop and they were trying to stop bad things happening, but they were also like confronted with stuff that really, you know, one big part of the book I think is that Hannah, the detective, comes to learn quite strongly by the end of the book that, you know, the person that she's chasing, the killer, isn't in any kind of way a common garden psychopath. That, you know, she comes to really understand that this person, what they're saying, you know, is that many things that they're talking about and they're trying to draw attention to, Hannah agrees with, and it leaves her in a very conflicted and difficult situation where, you know, with policing, we'd like to think it's about good guys versus bad guys, black versus white. Hannah finds herself in a lot of grey, and I guess that's one of the things that I've really enjoyed about the hunter versus the hunted in this book isn't simple.
Not at all, and that is something that I absolutely enjoyed that nothing is black and white like that, and I think Hannah really nails that. So identity is explored when we're talking about nothing being black or white there. Addison's parentage, she's Pakeha, she's Māori. And Hannah, she's police and she's Māori. But her job has forced her to choose between those two parts of her identity. Could you just talk us through that?
Yeah, it's a really great question. She's and during the research for the book, I did a lot of talking to cops. I've got 2 cops in my family. 2 of my nephews are both in the police, and I also did a lot of talking to female cops and Māori cops. And one really interesting thing that one particular former detective, a female Māori former detective, said to me was that there's an internal conflict between being blue and being brown. And that's something that you face throughout your career, and you're always trying to find your position on the scale between, where your loyalties, or where in any given minute where your identity, which is how you started the question, lies on that scale between blue and brown. And for Hannah, for the main character in Bed of the Blood, that's thrown in her face very early on in her career, when she is sent as a junior cop, fresh out of police college. One of the first things that she has to do is that she is sent by senior police hierarchy to a peaceful protest, the Māori peaceful protest on a contested piece of land. Peaceful protesters who actually, by rights, the land is theirs and was stolen centuries ago. And she's sent in by senior police hierarchy, along with a number of other Māori cops. The Māori police sent in to remove Māori peaceful protesters. And that has had a ripple-down effect throughout Hannah's life as a cop. And she's had blowback from whānau, in a way she sort of has become really identified with that action, because her image was caught on television news at the time. And unbeknownst to her too, there is a connection ultimately that comes around to the crimes that are happening today with that seminal event in her policing life. So as a consequence, for the main character, for Hannah, she's in many ways chosen to be blue and not brown for a lot of her career. And I think really interesting for her that she goes on when she is confronted with realizing that, she is the only person that can stop the killer from killing again. Part of the process that she goes through, I think that, I think is a really interesting thing for the main character, is that she comes to reassess that where she is on that scale. She comes to re-embrace a lot of her heritage and her culture and her self-identity as Māori that she has left behind, and faces up to the questions that she hasn't faced for 20 years when she was sent to do that as a junior cop.
Yeah. And by embracing those questions as well, I suppose she can get in there and make a difference, which she definitely does. There's a beautiful moment where she's exploring how, well, if I pull this kid up on this one thing, that's good. I'm talking about where there's a police stop in the car, and that could he'll never get a second chance. So she decides to give him that chance, and that's incredible. Yeah. So the
thank you very much. I'm really chuffed that you kind of looked at that moment, Louise, because that did come from a number of cops that I talked about that, about, one of the very first things that brings you to the police, the attention of the police, and gets you onto their books is, driving without a license. And that it's such a tiny thing, but it starts a process where, like you get nabbed the first time, and you get labelled, and at a certain point it's like, well, I'm being labelled as this person, so why not? And yeah.
Or you don't have a car, so you can't get to work, so you lose your job, and then it's the cycle
of poverty. Exactly.
Yeah. So the first bad guy that we meet is the truly bad guy, which is Patrick Thompson. So he's a minor character in some ways, but it's his sentencing for a heinous sexual assault, and the judge's comments are damning until he says the word "however," and Hannah's blood freezes as she hears this. And where did I just underline some bits and bobs there? We note the compelling commendations from your law school professors, the great promise for your future career in the legal fraternity, and on it goes, even though this kid has done something awful. And I can't claim this question. One of the members of our book club said, "Do you think that's a metaphor for colonization?" And we all went, "Ooh."
Oh, you've got a really smart book club.
We certainly do.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you know, like, I mean, so much in the book, again, isn't like a product of my imagination. You know, I mean, we've seen these cases.
Yeah.
We've seen the cases of, you know, high-profile rugby players, high-profile entertainers, high-profile, you know, people from the right family doing the legal degree or the medical degree or whatever it is, getting home detention for a crime where, you know, if you didn't come from those positions of privilege, if you didn't come from those positions of like, you know, from perceived as worthy, you'd be going to prison. And you know, we've seen that story again and again. And so I think, you know, and it's heartbreaking, and you know, for the victims having to look at this and go, you know, somehow this crime that has been committed against me is being treated leniently, not because of the effect on me. I'm destroyed, I'm ruined, but because of the you know, the perpetrator and their background and, you know, what area code in the city they come from. And it's devastating. And so again, I think it's, you know, reality is, you know, a rich well of important stuff that it's not coming from my imagination. It's stuff that's out.
I know, and that's almost doubly terrifying, isn't it? I suppose.
Yeah.
So your main bad guy, your serial killer, without spoilers, so I won't name him. He is a serial killer, you know, because it's a series of killings, but it's very logical and it's reasoned. So there's a however there for him also. But how did you create that character? Because he has our empathy, as well as the fact that he is killing people who are innocent, but there's that intergenerational responsibility, isn't there?
Yeah. I mean, what I really wanted to do with the killer, you know, again, like I said just a little bit earlier, was I really didn't want this to be a common garden psychopath. That I really wanted this to be somebody who is, you know, is driven by motivations and by they're genuinely wanting to make a change and wanting to make a difference, and they have fought for a whole lot of their lives. So again, trying to avoid spoilers, but they've fought to undo injustice, and at a certain point, it's become, they've realized that, you know, 200 years of colonization, 200 years of history is a weight and a foe against them that they are never going to win. And because of a number of circumstances around where they are and grief, you know, that someone really significant in their life dies, and they have lost all hope of change as well. And you know, I guess for me it was just a metaphor, really. You know, when your book club member asked that question about, is it a metaphor for colonization? In lots of ways, what happens to the main antagonist, to the killer, to me is a metaphor for the damage wrought by colonization and the you know, the ongoing the ongoing intergenerational pain and trauma, and how at a certain point, you know, sometimes people do break. And what, you know, a huge thing for me was really, you know, what I battled to do with that character was for the audience. Yeah, I don't know if it is empathy, but at least understanding. Like, you know, I want the audience, I want the reader to be able to look at that character, and it's not about, you know, condemnation of their heart. It is condemnation of their actions, because, you know, the tactics that they are using, you know, are wrong. But I wanted the audience to understand and empathize with what they had in what they had in their heart and the things that they were trying to say, really.
Yeah, and I suppose that character had tried everything, and this is where we can sort of relate it to terrorism. You know, some acts of terrorism are unjustified, and some are, well, what was I supposed to do? I tried everything and nobody was listening, so I put the bomb in the not that that is a an excuse for any of that. Gareth just told me I must ask viewers, if you have any questions out there for Michael, please type them into the Facebook comments, and Gareth will feed them through to us, so please do that. So justice, Michael, justice is a really big theme. Your book, In Dark Places, your award-winning book, was about the Taina Palder miscarriage of justice, and it's complicated, isn't it? Just just talk us through that a bit.
Yeah, so I got there's a moment in my life, maybe 8 or 9 years ago, that really was life-changing for me, and that was when I met Tim McKinnell, who is the private investigator who rediscovered Taina Palder's case after, you know, he was a forgotten man in prison for 21 years for a crime he didn't commit. And Tim, very early on, before the case became nationally known or you know, came into the press, Tim reached out to me, and I think he'd maybe seen some work that I'd done, and was maybe felt that I'd be interested and empathetic in the case. And he showed me the interviews, the police interviews with Taina, that took place over 5 days without a lawyer present, over which time Taina, who, you know, I watched all of those interviews, and I saw in front of me an innocent young Māori man who clearly knew nothing about the crime, but who, over the course of 5 days without a lawyer present, was, at the end of those 5 days, was arrested and had been assisted in constructing a false confession, and consequently went to prison for 21 years. That was the moment, Louise, that was of tectonic shift for me, seeing that young Māori man had been led down a path that led to the destruction of his life. And I guess for me, that became a moment where, you know, I've been working in the industry for 10, 15 years and developing a bunch of skills as a storyteller. And suddenly it was like this light going on that, you know, the skills that I'd worked so hard to develop could actually be used to tell a story that was really, that needed to be told, and, you know, to be part of what Tim was doing in trying to fight for justice for Taina. And so, you know, that became really, for everyone who got involved with Taina's story, like just like a real battle of passion. And I guess for me, in many ways, Taina's story is emblematic, or is kind of, you know, he's a living and really potent symbol for the way that the justice system has let down Māori again and again and again. I mean, we know the statistics. We know that 53% of our prison cells are occupied by Māori. We're actually 14% of society. We know that if you're Māori, you're more likely to be stopped by the cops, you're more likely to be questioned for a crime, you're more likely to be arrested for a crime. If you're arrested, you're more likely to be convicted. If you're convicted, you're going to have a longer sentence than non-Māori. And we know all these things. And Taina, you know, for me, became a way beyond, you know, this Taina's story, and it was so important to tell his story and to I guess to talk about what had happened to this young man and the tragedy of Taina. But also for me, it was like a way of talking about bigger things, the bigger issues, and about, what we're getting wrong, and we do so much right in this country, and we get things wrong, and sometimes they go terribly wrong. And I guess, I've always been really passionate about social justice. It's just, my dad was a Spitfire pilot in World War II, and he's like, from him, I just, my mum was a really great writer, and from her I got a love of words and storytelling. And my dad, from my dad, I got this kind of idea or passion for fighting the fights that are worth fighting. And so I guess, so telling Taina's story became like something that was just unbelievably pivotal in my career for the last 7 or 8 years. And in lots of ways, there is sort of lots of connections between telling Taina's story, a real life non-fiction conversation about the justice system going wrong, and Better the Blood. There's lots of connections between the two stories in terms of themes and ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we're thinking about the systemic injustices, have you seen change then since you wrote In Dark Places?
Yeah, I mean, there's things have happened. Like, Taina was questioned, must be 25 years ago now, and absolutely the questioning that happened, like, for those of us who've seen those tapes, it wouldn't be able to happen now. Like, there's certain approaches to questioning that that went very, very wrong in that questioning that wouldn't happen now. Some things have happened as a consequence directly of Taina's case, and one of those things is that there's been a criminal reviews commission been established, which didn't previously exist. And what that means is that it's a thing that's existed in other countries like Scotland and Scandinavian countries for a long time, which is, our process, if you've been wrongly convicted as Taina was, is incredibly complex, and you've got to get, heavy hitters on your side, and you've got to go, in Taina's case, the Privy Council or the Supreme Court, and this is all, our system means that is an unbelievably expensive process, and you've got to have, people battling on your side.
Yeah.
The Criminal Case Review Commission is more proactive, and they're more, you can approach them with a lower bar of, you don't have to spend 2 years paying an extraordinarily expensive lawyer, incredible amounts of money to go to them. And if you have enough, like if the Criminal Case Review Commission has enough, sees enough in your case, then they'll be more proactive in it. So there's that kind of systemic change. I'm really reassured by the fact that policing has become incredibly proactive about changing the face of who's accepted, really proactive about getting Māori police officers, Pasifika police officers, that kind of change of the people who are thinking and the people who are acting within the system, I think is massive. Still, like, there is, it takes a long time to reverse all those statistics, and it takes a lot of people being very, very conscious of inherent racism, institutional racism, and always questioning themselves, am I talking to this person because I should be talking to them, or is there an assumption that I've made? And I do hope things are changing.
Yeah, and I think the more conversations that we have like this through fiction as well as non-fiction, the better. So how do you, we've only got about 5 minutes left, can't believe how quickly this has gone. So you've done screenwriting and non-fiction and fiction, so how do you transfer those skills? Is it very different?
Funny kind of way. Well, it's very different. Writing for the screen, there's certain big differences between writing for the screen and writing prose. Writing for the screen, is extremely, it's the most structured form of writing that you ever write. So a screenplay, a feature film something happens at minute 10 of every feature film that you've ever enjoyed watching, and something happens at minute 18, and something happens at minute 25. The same thing happens. No matter what the film is, the same. It's just the way that it's like a haiku, right? It's like a haiku has 14 syllables, and every haiku is different and beautiful because those 14 syllables are all unique and tell a different story. But every haiku is the same, and every feature film is different and beautiful because every story is different, but it's actually told the same. And so the difference between writing for the screen and writing for prose, prose is there is still absolutely something is structured. The book is structured in a certain way, but there's a lot more freedom. Like in prose, like in a novel, the joy that I get from writing a novel is that you can spend a whole chapter that just, is 10, 30 seconds of someone's life sitting at a table having a cup of coffee, reflecting upon something. And they reflect upon it, and you realize this was a formative moment in this person's life. But what's actually happening if it was on screen is they're just having a coffee. And, that's not compelling screen storytelling. But in a book, a novel, in a prose, you can make it compelling because it's taking you deep, 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 deep into your character in a way that's quite difficult on film. In film, no one wants to hear voiceovers, and people kind of, you can take the audience into a character in a clumsy way, but you have to rely so much on other ways of getting backstory out, and of course the beautiful performance of your actors. So in lots of ways, the two different kinds of storytelling are profoundly different, but in other ways, I think, weirdly, I treat prose and screenwriting as almost identical in terms of the actual, for me, it's all about evoking really rich imagery. Obviously with a screenplay, that's what it is all about, really powerful images that drag the audience into a story and make them laugh and make them cry and make them scream out of anger at what's happening. Or and when I'm writing a novel, when I'm writing prose, I feel exactly the same way, that words are really important to me and how words come together, but what's much more important is the images that I'm evoking for the audience. And I want the reader, while they're reading the book, to really to totally I want to drag them into that room. I want them to know what the room feels like and smells like, and I want them to really experience viscerally in a very visual way. So yeah, they're really different, but in lots of ways they're really the same, the two types of writing, I think. Yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating. Thank you. I'm hoping that Gareth was taking notes there as well. minute 8. So will we see Hannah again? What's next for Hannah Westerman and Michael Bennett?
I'll just turn you around. So I'm working on book 2.
Yay, that's the answer I wanted. Oh. So
I'm just making charts right now of Hannah's journey through book 2. So it's the I'm feeling right now a little bit of the difficult second album feeling, but I know that as part of the process. Every time you write something, every time you start a new project, it's like, oh my God, this is the time they're going to find out I'm a talentless fool, and the fraud squad's going to come knocking on my door and say, "You're not really a writer."
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen.
But thank you. But I'm in that place of The book 2 is on the way, and also the adaptation to a 6-part television series is underway. So
that's incredible. I'm so happy. Yeah. Can't wait. So when might we see that?
Television, me writing charts up on the wall costs nothing. Television costs a lot of dollars. So that takes a little bit of pulling together the pieces. But I've got to say, the reaction within New Zealand, we've published in New Zealand, Australia, and UK. Currently, the United States comes out in January, and we've got 9 translations underway that come out next year, and which is like just so, I still can't get my head around any of that. Like the reaction to my little kind of story that just seems to really spark some kind of chords, internationally, and which is just really humbling and incredible. But all of that, long story short, all of that makes for the challenge of raising the millions of dollars to make a show. It certainly helps with that, the amount of attention that the book is getting. Yeah.
Excellent. Oh, that's fantastic news. And we do have to wrap up now, which I feel is a shame because I must have about 1 billion questions that have sparked from this conversation, but we will watch your progress with interest and watch Hannah's progress with interest. So once again, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Louise. I'm really complimented by your interest in the book. Thank you so much.
Oh, cool stuff. Thank you. Cheers.
Okay, awesome.